Hello, I'm Ashley Hasty, a lecturer in the Department of Apparel Merchandising and Interior Design at Indiana University. I teach fashion history, brand management and advertising, and visual merchandising courses to undergraduate students. My research interests primarily revolve around World War II war brides, what women wore to their weddings during the war, and how they were able to procure the garment. Therefore, this discussion of 18th century is far from the garments I usually research. However, my fashion history course covers apparel from the 17th century through the 20th century, so I do have some experience with this time period. I really enjoyed the challenge and the opportunity to research a piece not directly associated with my typical research. Today I'm going to talk about a fashion plate illustrated by Claude-Louis Desrais from 1778. First, I'll talk a little bit about the artist and the role of fashion plates in 18th century fashion. Then I'll discuss the fashion illustrated in this piece, starting with the dress and fabric, and then working from head to toe to discuss the design details of the illustration. I'll be happy to answer questions at the end of the talk. Claude-Louis Desrais was an artist known for a variety of works, including fashion plates, portraits of famous men, and military and historical scenes. His work, shown here, Woman in Fashionable Dress, is one of his many fashion plates. He was one of 4 artists who contributed most to the fashion plates in the Galerie des Modes et Costumes Françaises, a book of illustrations published at the time. In fact, he contributed the first 68 plates in the series. It is unclear whether or not Desrais attended Académie Royale des Peintures et des Sculptures, a premier art school at the time. One source I found said he was never to be agré, which translates to registered, allowed, or authorized. Another source I found says not only did he attend, but he became the protégé of Charles-Nicolas Cochin, a French engraver, designer, writer, and art critic. There is little information to be found about Claude-Louis Desrais as an artist or man, but images of his works are littered across websites such as allposters.com and artnet.com. It seems he was a very prolific artist. Before Twitter, Style.com, Fashion Police, and Vogue, engravers and illustrators such as Claude-Louis Desrais disseminated the latest styles from Paris to the masses through print portfolios such as those printed in the Galerie des Modes et Costumes Françaises. These illustrations depicted significant design details and were touted to be designs from nature, real-life ensembles worn by French elegants in Paris or the royal palace at Versailles. Much like fashion magazines today, they illustrate to people types of clothes that they should wear to keep up to date with fashions. The most well-known of these fashion portfolios was the Galerie des Modes et Costumes Françaises, which disseminated about 500 fashion plates over 2 decades. This fashion portfolio was printed by 2 merchants, Asnaud and Rapilly, who sold the book in their store and offered it as a subscription. The illustrations were offered in 2 forms, hand-colored or left uncolored to allow women to color them in at home. With over 3,000 illustrations of 1770s hairstyles and headdresses, another popular fashion portfolio was the Treatise of the Principles of Dressing the Hair of Women. Quite a mouthful. Hairstyles were a significant fashion feature during the 18th century, which I will discuss in more detail later. The gown pictured in this illustration is a polonaise gown. There are 2 theories for how the robe à la polonaise received its name. In 1772, Poland was divided by 3 kingdoms. One theory is that it is named to commemorate the partitioning of Poland. Another theory is that the polonaise gowns physically resemble that of traditional Polish dress. People probably had images like this in mind when they called the dress à la polonaise. The features of this dress are few: small waist, full skirt, and ample fabric draped around the skirt. The skirt consists of a puffed overskirt and a petticoat, both of which I will discuss in more detail later in this talk, but it is the excessive ornamentation that often draws attention, usually described as its wedding cake look. The ornamentations might include any or all of the following: bows, puffs, appliques, ribbon, fringe, tassels, lace, rosettes, ruffles, flowers, and more. In subsequent periods, the term polonaise will be used very broadly to refer to any overskirt that is puffed or draped over an underlayer. Polonaise gowns of the 18th century are most commonly found in silk, cotton, and linen, with silk leading by quite a large margin. The silk industry was led by two French cities, Tours and Lyon. Although Tours had the advantage of proximity to the luxury market in Paris, Lyon eventually became the largest French producer of silk. At its peak, 1/3 of Lyon's population was involved with the silk industry. Eventually, the French silk production became known for its quality, beating the Italian silk production that had dominated in the 17th century. Technology played a large role in textile production during this time. The French government showed its support of the Lyon silk industry through the development of new loom mechanisms and dyeing technology. A lot of capital was put toward incentivizing technology advancements, resulting in John Kay's fly shuttle, James Hargreaves's spinning jenny, and Samuel Crompton's mule spinning frame. Cotton was also an important textile during this time and was popular among ordinary people as well as upper-class women for dresses worn in the home. Due to the more casual look of this dress, it is likely that this dress is cotton. The following are quotes I've found describing the hairstyles of this time period. Quote, "Hairstyles were complicated, to say the least. Women's faces looked tiny framed in the center of such outlandish ornamentation. Cartoonists of the day delighted in lampooning the extreme coiffures. Hairstyles raised a foot high and tower-wise. These hairdos were complex affairs. The woman's chin was halfway to her feet." These quotes only begin to describe the absurdity of this 18th century fashion trend. The height was created with padded wool or horsehair, wire frames covered in both real and false hair, crinkled crinoline, and flour paste. In fact, so much flour was used that it depleted France's supply, causing a shortage of bread. Once the height was created, the hair was decorated with ample ornamentation, including feathers, flowers, jewels, plumes, ribbon loops, ruffles, wire shops with billowing silk sails or miniature villages, chariot models, landscapes, streams, fruit baskets, windmills, groves, sheep, shepherds, and shepherdesses. Of course, such work required trained professional hairdressers and hours of labor. These professionals would powder, curl, and roll the hair, and then lay out, construct, and arrange the hairstyles. Such works of art would last for months, which, of course, would invite pests and bugs to set up camp on a woman's head. These were taken care of by making a slit in the hard exterior surface of the coiffure to allow a lady to use an ivory scratching stick inside. Another common look were these sausage-shaped side rolls that appeared beneath the ornate creations. Whether the woman wore dresses of the Rococo style or the neoclassical style, jewelry was a subtle addition to the overall look. In my research of jewelry worn during this time period, I found conflicting descriptions. Whereas one source said women often wore earrings that matched their necklaces, another source said earrings were not much worn by women of this time period, even though the hairdressing left the ears completely exposed. Sources do agree that necklaces were the most commonly seen jewelry worn by women during the 18th century, particularly during the 1770s. Among the popular necklaces were rows of pearls, as seen in this illustration, chains, lockets, pendants, and crosses, as well as chokers. Other jewelry worn includes watches worn around the neck or hanging at the waist, brooches fastened at the bodice, rings, and bracelets by the more grandiose woman. A fichu is a soft, transparent neckcloth. It was worn for one of two reasons: to conceal the front closure of a dress or to cover the breasts. Some gowns were designed with front closures, and a fichu was secured with a brooch to conceal the hooks, laces, or pins. Necklines of this time period were cut low in a square or wide oval shape. As a result, quite a bit of the bust was exposed, and the fichu allowed women to display as much or as little as they'd like. A fichu could be worn in a variety of ways: crossed at the breast and tucked into a sash, crossed in front and tied at the back of the waistline, and tucked into the jacket under the lapels. Sleeves during this time were slim and usually extended to the elbow or upper forearm. The typical robe à la polonaise had 3/4 length sleeves with little ruffles as decoration. Some sources refer to this ruffle as engageante, but other sources say engageantes refer to larger and fuller ruffles of lace as pictured in the Portrait of a Woman by François Hubert Duret. In her hand, she holds a fan. Fans as fashion accessories arrived in France as early as the 14th century, but it wasn't until the 17th century that they gained popularity. It was the 18th century, however, that was described as one of the most glorious periods for the fan. Aesthetically, they were quite beautiful and ornate, like much of the fashion during this time. They were often made of ivory, vellum, or taffeta. Often fans were painted with romantic or topical political scenes. Unlike most fashion accessories, fans came with a list of etiquette rules along with their aesthetic value. It was considered, for example, a faux pas to open a fan in front of someone of a higher rank or who was sovereign, unless making a presentation. Fans allowed women to spy on others at the theater with new inventions such as lenses in the hinge and see-through windows in the panels. In addition, fans came with their own sign language that was taught in an academy in London. The painted vignettes on a fan might be used to express a woman's mood or to signal a message to an admirer. The swagged overskirt is one of the most recognizable features of the polonaise gown. It is parted in the center to create an opening that reveals the underskirt, also referred to as a petticoat. This overskirt is often draped into 3 large swags over the sides and back of the underskirt. The methods to create this drapery varied greatly. It might be held up by strings, or with ribbons or silk cords attached on the outside of the waist and looped underneath the skirt to form the puffs. Yet another way to form these puffs was to place part of the overskirt into a slit or pocket. This overskirt is less voluminous than many of those seen at court. Thus, this version would have been worn by less affluent women or for a more casual event. Wide hips are a definite indication of 18th century fashion, and were an essential element of attire at court. Panier, the undergarment that created the wide hip look, means basket in French, possibly because it looks like 2 baskets on either hip. This silhouette was often the subject of caricatures at the time, but it was still very much loved by women. Panniers were constructed with hoops made of wicker or whalebone encased in fabric to create the bell-shaped skirt. Later, these hoops were drawn in with tapes to form an ovoid shape. They were eventually modified and split into 2 halves. Panniers could be purchased ready-made, made to measure, or specially ordered to size at a hoop maker's shop. Petticoats or underskirts were often made of the same fabric or in a coordinating color as the overskirt, making the garment appear unified. This particular petticoat is flounced, meaning that a ruffle appears partway up the skirt, adding an additional layer to the ornamentation of the skirt. The shortened skirts that revealed the shoes and ankle for the first time in history was a short-lived style, popular in the late 1770s and early 1780s, sometimes referred to as the shepherdess version of the gown, which prevented the wearer from stepping on the edge while climbing stairs or rising from a seat. In addition, it made walking in such full skirts much more manageable. Due to muddy and flooded roads, walking was difficult during this time period. One response to this was to allow for space for carriages to park just outside the shops so that customers could shop the stores without stepping foot on the streets. In addition, the wealthier women wore high heels, which, as many women know today, restrained mobility and made walking more difficult. At the beginning of the 18th century, heels were chunky and toes were sharply pointed. Later, heels became more slender and the toes rounded. Shoes consisted of uppers, covered in luxurious textiles such as silk, satin, or brocade, tongues, side pieces called laches, and decorated with ornaments such as buckles, satin bows, or small rosettes. Buckles actually tended to cost more than the shoes themselves. Shoes were made to match the dresses through the use of identical fabric, color, as in this case, or embroidery details. As a review, 18th century fashion, as illustrated by Claude-Louis Desrais in this fashion plate, consisted of the polonaise gown, crowning glory hairstyles, simple pearl necklaces, a fichu, small ruffles at the elbow-length sleeve, a fan, a swagged overskirt, panniers, a flounced petticoat, shortened skirts, and high-heeled shoes. Thank you so much for attending this talk. I'd like to say thank you to the Indiana University Art Museum, especially Nan Brewer, for scheduling this talk. Thanks again.